Apparently, some of us are taller than others. Just hang on here. Yeah, so I didn't think the stick thing was right there. I thought it was something else because the stick thing is the Jordan. Sticks, putting your staff in the water apparently works in the Jordan, but doesn't work in the Red Sea. Put your hand out. Yeah, that too. Yeah, so the staff works sometimes, but not others. So we have actually two stories this week. Pardon me? Oh, okay. There you go. There you go. So two stories this morning. Last week we read the story of Joseph, right? And we didn't get around to it because Andrew was preaching and that wasn't his task. So I thought we'd come back to the story of Joseph today, and then also try to get the Red Sea in here a little bit. And in a lot of ways, these are two stories of Emmanuel, right? Two stories of God with us. And as we, let's face it, we're entering the Christmas time already. You start to see the Christmas stuff in the stores already. And as we enter this time, it's good to remember there are lots of stories in the Bible about God with us, and most of them aren't nearly as romantic as the little baby in the manger. So it's nice to start somewhere a little more real. And the Joseph story. So last week we read the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife and him going to jail and stuff like that. And I'm never sure how much of the story you guys already know. Some of you know it well, some of you less. So we're going to start. Oh, okay. So we're going to start at the beginning of the Joseph story. So Joseph is the son of Jacob, right? Abraham and Isaac, and then Jacob. And Jacob has 12 sons. It's a little more complicated than that. And if you're worried about Jacob's mother and having 12 boys, not to mention all the daughters, right? There were actually 4 women involved in this process. So no particular woman had to have 12 sons. But in any case, right, he's the youngest, he's the baby, right? And he's his dad's boy, right? And so his dad makes him this special piece of clothing, right? Which at some point on history got translated as a coat of many colors. And so like Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat and Donny Osmond, all this sort of stuff, right? For those of you who do pop culture, there you go, right? But when I was learning Hebrew, we learned that the coat of many colors, the Hebrew original is very difficult to translate. And so that's why the Greek came up with coat of many colors. And then I was reading some more recent scholarship a few weeks ago, and I was told that no, in fact, this is not at all a difficult translation. The problem is that it's difficult to think, because the Hebrew is actually quite straightforward, that what Jacob made for Joseph was called a ketuna, which is a very typical word for a piece of clothing that is worn exclusively by women. It's a dress. That's what Jacob makes for his favorite son. He makes him a dress, a long sleeve or a long dress or something long about it. All right. So like maybe by the time we get around to the Potiphar's wife story, maybe the reason that Joseph isn't interested in Potiphar's wife because he's just not interested in Potiphar's wife. I don't know. Right? But in any case, right? So Joseph's the spoiled little boy, and his brothers then, beat him up and send him off to Egypt. And the story says that God was with Joseph. Right? And right, that's a very odd thing to think, I think. Because, right, this guy, is hated by his brothers, gets sold to some wandering traders who sell him off. And apparently this is a sign that God is with him. That's a very odd sign. If you got, sold off to slavery and ended up in Egypt, right, as someone's slave today, you go, oh yeah, God must be with me. Here I am, right? But he prospered in his own sort of way, right? And then he got sold out by Potiphar's wife, and he ended up back in jail. And the story says God was with him. Emmanuel. God was with him, right? In jail, which didn't mean he got out of jail right away. He got out of jail eventually, right? But it's such an odd story to think about, like what are the signs that God is with you? Apparently, it has nothing to do with staying out of jail, right? Because he actually went into jail because he did the right thing, right? So it's not like, well, God is with you, therefore, you do the right thing and you go from victory to victory. No, God is with you, you do the right thing and you go from slavery to jail. And God is still with you. Right? So God blessed Joseph and he went to jail, and God blessed Joseph even when he was in jail, right? Because the Bible just assumes that, yeah, these are human systems and a lot of them are evil. And we can get into trouble for doing perfectly wonderful things, but we are still tasked with doing what we can. So this is the Joseph story in a really small nutshell. And it's a story about faith in times of individual trouble, right? And this is where the psalm that Edith read, right? Save me, O God, for the water has come up to my neck. Right? It's like, usually you get this very feeling of, well, we're in trouble and and the mud and all of that stuff, right? So it's times of personal trouble. And the Exodus story, of course, is much more a story about when we get into trouble altogether, when the whole system, when all of us, right, when it's just all going wrong. And again, it's so instructive because in this story, God led them there, right? So we were here heading off, and there was the Reed Sea over here. Red Sea is a bad translation. It's the Reed Sea, right? It's a swamp, right? And back there was, Axel and his chariots. And we were there, the Israelites were there because God said, that's where you should be right now, right? And the people of Israel never come out well in their own history, right? The people today who said, well, we should read stories where we're doing well, those are the only kinds of stories we should read in history, those people have never paid attention to their Bibles. Because the people of Israel almost never come out. It's pretty hard to think of a story, even when the people come out, oh yeah, we did the right thing every time, right? Because, right, this story is in Exodus, and then we go into Leviticus, which is a bunch of rules, then we go into the book of Numbers, and the entire book of Numbers is taken up with two things. One of them is rules, and the other is people complaining. That's the entire book of Numbers, right? Sometimes the people complain about Moses and God. Sometimes Moses complains about the people and God, and sometimes God complains about the people and Moses, right? And those are the three things that happen when, anytime there's a story in the book of Numbers, it's the book of complaining, right? So it's not like, the people went on after the sea. I think we went through the sea, and then they went to the Mount Zion, and then everything was just roses after that. It's like, no, they just could not, it's like they could not think of enough ways to screw up, just one after the other, right? In some ways, the whole book of Numbers is instruction on how not to do things. That is in some ways the core of the book of Numbers, is like, you want to know how not to do things, read the stories. The laws are all about how to do things, the stories are all about how not to do things. Right? And yet, God was with them. These are all Emmanuel stories. Sometimes God is with them and really, really not happy, but, right, God is with them. And there's all of this fear of the unknown in this, and we are in such a time when if like fear of the, because like what is the world going to look like in 20 years or 50 years, or because some of you are still going to be here in 50 years. And, so you got a longer term worry than those of us who are pretty sure we're not going to be here in 50 years. Right? And it's a different perspective. And there are still problems, right? There are still things in this story that are troubling, right? All the hierarchy in this story gets to me after a while. There's God, and then there's Moses, and then there's the people. And the people have no access to God in these stories. Their only access to God is to complain to Moses, right? And then, and then Moses talks to God, right? And so it's all very structured up and down. And I think maybe, I mean, in some ways, Jesus came and said, maybe we could do this another way. Maybe we can each have God as our Father. And again, that causes its own problems, because if we all have access to God and three of us hear God differently, then what do we do? Right? And that tends to be what happens in groups, but right, it's always this balance. But all of these things, right, all of these things are things that happen to people inside the covenant. Right? These are the people of the covenant. These are the people who've said yes to God. These are the people who've said yes to the covenant, right? So we've got our covenant here. For those of you who are here can see it, right? And we're going to be signing this covenant, but right, it's not a shield, right? It's not something where we're going to hold it up and go, well, it's going to protect us from stuff, right? Again, this is one of these things that it would really be nice to believe that, but it's really hard to believe if you ever actually read your Bible, which I still recommend, right? So in so many ways, the covenant and life is the entry into mystery. It's like, well, what is going to happen? I don't know, but God will be with us. And what is that going to look like? Don't know yet. God will be with us. So that's what's going to be happening. And we're entering this morning into World Communion Sunday, which I'll talk a little bit about once we get there. But just this sense of God with us, I think, is worth taking a few minutes to think about this week. But let's respond. So one of the favorite things about Faith in Times of Trouble for me is that we get to sing songs from the low 600s. This is my favorite part of this hymnal. I could sing the 600s all, like, just every week. So many of the songs here that can we just sing 610 too? And we should really learn 609. And, there's just all of these cool songs. But we're going to sing, which one are we singing this time? 616, right? Right. So I invite you to just take your time with this one. Let's sing it through a couple of times.